I have only been welcomed with everyone that I've met, and it's been a very enjoyable process. Hello, my name is Stephen Mansfield, and I arrived in Portugal about 3 years ago with my wife and 2 sons, aged 13 and 10. I'm the latest guest on Portugal, The Simple Life. I'm the co-founder of Singularity Watch and looking for further entrepreneurial endeavors while I'm here in Portugal.
Welcome back, or welcome to another episode of Portugal, The Simple Life. And I'm really happy to be joined here by Stephen Mansfield. Stephen, hello, bon dia. Thank you for being on the podcast. How are you?
Oh, I'm very well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me on. It's a pleasure to be part of your podcast.
You're very welcome. You are clearly not Portuguese, because Portuguese maybe wouldn't give up their lunchtime to be on a podcast. You know, they'd be like, no, we can't do this at lunchtime. So I appreciate you giving up the time.
No problem at all. It's my pleasure.
Cool. Stephen, why don't you start off telling us a little bit about you?
Sure. Well, I'm Irish by birth. I lived mainly in the UK when I was growing up. And then in my early 20s, I left Europe, basically, and I lived in Asia, mostly in Japan and Hong Kong, until about 3 years ago, when we relocated. Along the way, I met my wife. We had 2 children. And after about 28 years in Asia, we relocated to Portugal.
How did Portugal start for you? How did Portugal get on your radar?
I think it started after we had children, and I think for my wife and I, our priorities changed, and it was very much, we realized that at the time we were living in Hong Kong, and we felt that Hong Kong was a little bit too much of a bubble. Well, there were lots of things going on. You know, there's a political situation that was going on in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
There was our personal situation that was going on in Hong Kong, and then there was the rigmarole that was COVID going on, which was, and it was all
That was ground zero for a lot of
pressure. Yeah, I guess so. But there was a lot of pressure on us as a family. It was causing us a lot of restrictions, which we didn't appreciate. We felt it was overbearing, and we were looking for somewhere where we have 2 boys, so they needed more space. They needed to get outside. They needed to be able to run around. We wanted somewhere where the weather was accommodative to that. And as we looked around, we looked at a lot of places. We looked at Singapore. We looked at Malaysia. We looked at Thailand. We looked at the US briefly. We looked at going back to Japan. We briefly looked at sort of UK/Ireland. But, you know, as we went through all the list, Portugal kept coming up over and over again. And eventually we actually resolved to move to Portugal before COVID even existed. So my wife and I had visited here, and we had tentatively put that at the top of our list, and we were actively looking for schools for the kids and trying to get them accommodated. And then when COVID hit, I think it just upped our timeline a little bit.
Yeah, it did that for a lot of people. I think accelerated some plans.
Yes.
Yeah, so,
We certainly weren't the only ones looking at it at that time.
Stephen, I mean, you mentioned you had a list and you were kind of considering other places. I mean, you don't have to give away too much personal information, but what were kind of some of the things on that list, and how did Portugal sort of measure up, or why did it measure up?
We wanted to get an environment that was closer to what my wife and I grew up with, which is much more European style.
Where's your wife from?
Well, interestingly, she's half Japanese.
Okay.
But she grew up and if you met her, you'd think she was English. But that was what we were looking for. We wanted to find that environment. And Asia, the other thing about Asia, it's very frenetic. Wherever you go in Asia, you can say that Thailand's relaxed and chilled out, but if you go to Bangkok, there's nothing relaxed about Bangkok. We wanted to move away from that a little bit, so our boys had fewer distractions, and we could hopefully get them focused on 1 or 2 key areas and have them grow up with specific skills rather than just experiencing this whole onslaught that is the Asian culture. And that's nothing against it. There's just a personal perspective and a personal preference. So that's what we were looking for. And then I think it just boiled down to environment and schools. That's really what drove us towards Portugal. And finally, it was a very easy move because I've got an Irish passport. It was not. There were no issues with visas or no issues with immigration. It was just turn up and we were effectively in the door.
And the reason I brought up the question is because in the past, Portugal has always been viewed as this kind of retirement golfing destination. Now you're seeing families coming out, you're seeing people coming out to work. They're coming for, we can talk about that pace of life and that tempo. You use the word tempo, which is funny from a watch guy. But also there's opportunity here. There's a lot going on, and it opens up things a little bit more for people, that it's not just purely, Portugal's not just purely a place to come and retire and play golf.
There's a huge amount of talent sitting around that is there to be tapped. And I'm just amazed at every time I have a conversation with someone and say, oh, I wonder if there's someone who knows about X, Y, and Z. Within about 2 minutes, it's like, oh, so-and-so's father did that in, pick a country. and before you know it, there's someone who has some experience that maybe can point you in the right direction. And it's a very easy conversation. So yes, I thought when I moved here, I would be sitting around with a lot of elderly retired people, and I have been joyously disabused of that notion now, which is great. So there's a lot of people that you can sit down, talk to, and have very good, meaningful conversations about business, about how to develop a business and how to move it forward.
Looking for a home in Portugal? This break in Portugal, the Simple Life podcast, is brought to you by Dylan and his team of certified realtors at Portugal Realty. Portugal Realty offers the exclusive Simple Life home buyer program. Visit portugalrealty.com today and book your free call to find out more. Welcome to the Simple Life.
Just, shed some light on that side of Portuguese life, that relationship with time, and how there's always time for a conversation. There's always time for a meal. It's a beautiful, unique thing in Portugal.
We had moved from Hong Kong. It's difficult to just say it's just Asia. Hong Kong is a particular microcosm of, and I don't want to say rush, but high tempo. It's a better way to describe it. Things are just, the beat of the drum just goes a little bit faster. If you go to Japan, it's a little bit slower, but it's still a faster tempo than Portugal. So each country has its own flow, is the way I think I'd describe it. And what I realized, and I discovered this particularly hard way, is there's no point in fighting the flow. You need to get into the flow of the country or the place you're living in, and you need to just go with it and accept that that's the way it is, because it's much easier than fighting it. And so, it took us a little bit of time to adapt. I think the adaptation was more trying to understand what the tempo is and where the priorities lie as well, because there's slightly different priorities in the different geographies. I think it's just, I don't see it as it's just a little bit of a journey of discovery. And to be honest, if I moved back to the UK, I'd have to go through the same process again, because I haven't lived there since 1993, and I'm sure everything's changed. So that's, again, I think it's just understanding the unwritten rules, maybe is the best way to describe it. It's not even understanding. It's just, people move in different ways, and we are creatures we are social creatures, so we are impacted by those around us and how they act in the bigger environment. So it's important to try and get into the flow, and like I said, it just makes it easier getting stuff done.
Do you think Portugal has changed you in relation to that, or it changed you in some way?
Oh, yes, definitely. I'm a lot more There are many things that I'm much more relaxed about than I was when I was living in Hong Kong. Should we say deadlines are a lot more flexible than I would have accepted them in Hong Kong. Just stuff like that.
You've lived in all these different places with your work. You've had exposure to lots of different cultures and nationalities. What do you want to say about the Portuguese people? What has your experience been of the Portuguese people?
It's been fantastic, actually. And I'm surprised how many I have been privileged to meet, especially through my son's football club. I end up chatting to a lot of them on the sidelines. I met some really interesting people, and that circle continues to grow. And I'm also amazed at how fantastic their English is. I'm also disappointed because my Portuguese doesn't develop because of that. So it's it's a blessing and a curse, but I have only been welcomed with everyone that I've met, and it's been a very enjoyable process.
Have you had a chance to explore different parts of the country? Any places that stood out for you and your family?
We love going over into Alentejo and towards Evora and Stremesh. Stremesh, there we go.
Yeah.
If I can pronounce it correctly. That direction, it was lovely, and exploring these places is fantastic. And our boys love to go and explore, and we find Saturday markets and visit a few wineries and just really just exploring the place. And as we're out there, we find more and more to go and explore and go and do, and it becomes a little bit more what's the right word? Yeah, it just opens up. It's like peeling the onion. There's more. The more time we spend there, we see there's more to do, and we just keep peeling that onion. So we go over there quite regularly, actually, maybe once every 2 or 3 months.
What's one thing, Stephen, that you'd like people to remember and to take away from our conversation?
I think just the most important thing, and this is something that has been constantly replicated when I was in Japan, when we moved to Hong Kong, and now again in Portugal. Find the flow, find the way things are done, and don't try and impose your set of expectations on what's going on around you. Start with a blank piece of paper and work out how to move forward, and then it becomes so much easier.
Stephen, a question that we ask all of our guests: Portugal, the simple life. Why?
Weather, outdoors, and just appreciation of life.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been a pleasure.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a wonderful 45 minutes chatting to you.
Likewise. And I'm going to let you call it.
And that's a wrap.
So thank you once again to our guests, and thank you to all of you for listening. Please subscribe, share with your friends, give us a thumbs up, and please leave a comment or a review. We always love to hear from you. Don't forget, Portugal The Simple Life also has a magazine, so download it. It's for free. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode, and as we say in Portugal, sejas bem-vindo. Welcome to The Simple Life.